Good evening. My name is Bob Carey. I'm president of the New School, and I'm very pleased to welcome to New School the Commissioner of the world's busiest fire suppression emergency medical service agency, New York City Fire Commissioner Nicholas Scoppetta. Before I welcome Commissioner Scoppetta to the podium, I'd like to first of all thank Arian Mack, who's hiding down here in the front row, who is the Alfred J. and Manette C. Merrill Professor of Psychology at the New School for Social Research. Arian is a great scholar, but she has also worked tirelessly in organizing leading conferences at the New School, of which this is the 17th annual. Arian, we are very fortunate to be in the same community as you. I want to thank you one more time for organizing a great conference. This past decade has paid witness to some of the most devastating and far-reaching disasters of our world, and also of our nation, and most particularly here in New York City, that our city has ever experienced. We have seen both natural and man-made events that have required the utmost fortitude to just survive. It has been through much hindsight and forethought that we are learning how to better prevent, better prepare, and better respond to such disasters, which causes and effects are occurring with increasing frequency, wider reach, and longer-lasting impacts. The Social Research Conference Series was founded by Arian Mack in an effort to enhance public understanding of critical and contested issues by exploring them in their broad historical and cultural context. Our assumptions about disasters and their impact on society are conditioned by our understanding of history and of cultural influences, as well as our changing politics and media. As today's sessions demonstrated, we cannot take these assumptions for granted. What we term disasters, why they demand a certain type of response, and what form that response should take, are all issues in need of serious consideration. We also know that our inquiries cannot be limited to a particular field or discipline. Certainly, we have an awful lot to learn from one another. This conference vitally opens up communication among scholars, policymakers, and public officials. It enables us to better address our general assumptions about disasters and disaster readiness. It is very appropriate today that we are joined by Commissioner Nicholas Scoppetta, whose extensive experience in government and management spans 4 decades. Mayor Bloomberg appointed Mr. Scoppetta New York City's 31st Fire Commissioner less than 3 months after the attacks of 9/11, in which the department lost 343 members serving in the line of duty. As first responders to fires, public safety, and medical emergencies, disasters, and terrorist attacks, the New York City Fire Department, under the leadership of Commissioner Scoppetta, protects the lives and property of New York City residents and visitors. With more than 16,000 fire, EMS, and civilian members, the department continues to set new standards of excellence and models of practice locally, nationally, and globally. Commissioner Scoppetta has also served our city as Commissioner of the Administration for Children's Services, Assistant District Attorney in New York County, Assistant United States Attorney for the Southern District of New York, Chairman of the Commission to Combat Police Corruption, and as Deputy Independent Counsel into the investigation and prosecution of a former Special Assistant to the President of the United States. Please join me in welcoming to the New School and to this podium Commissioner Nick Scoppetta.
Thanks, Bob. It reminds me of a time I was in court watching the Lenny Bruce trial, and somebody put an expert witness on for him, and in order to qualify him, went through all of the positions that this professor at Yale had held, and Lenny Bruce said in a loud stage whisper, after 14 or 15 positions were described, he said, "This guy's our witness. He can't even hold down a job." That was not in the script. It just occurred to me when I heard the introduction. Well, good evening, everyone, and thanks for having me. And thanks to the New School administration, in particular Arian Mack, for putting together this conference. And to Bob Kerry for his kind introduction, and more importantly, for his service to our country. It's an honor to share the stage with you. Pleased to speak at this conference on disasters, although I have to admit it gave me a moment's pause to be considered an authority on the matter. In fact, I was reminded of the memorable instance of foot and mouth disease from then Governor Edmund Brown of California, who in reaction to the Watts riots in 1965 remarked, "Why, this is the worst disaster since my election." But in the end, the invitation was simply too important to pass up. And I was intrigued when I saw the list of conference participants, many areas of expertise represented here for this two-day conference. And the kind of scholarship that they are doing is extremely relevant to our times. As we sit here this evening, California is still reeling from some of the worst fires in their history. New Orleans has yet to be rebuilt. And for many here in New York, the memory of our worst disaster, September 11th, 2001, is still painfully fresh. New York City Fire Department has been on the ground in each of these disasters. In addition, in our day-to-day operations, the fire department oversees fire and life safety of our 8 million inhabitants and the millions more who work here in the city and visit the city every day. We respond to all emergency medical and fire calls in more than 321 square miles of the 5 boroughs. And last year, our more than 11,500 firefighters put out over 50,000 fires. Our emergency medical technicians and paramedics responded to 1.3 million calls. That's just the regular business of the fire department. And to give you an idea of the variety of irregular, we'll call it, situations we've dealt with, in the last several years, we've responded to a wall collapse causing a landslide onto a busy highway, 2 building explosions, a single-engine plane crashing into a high-rise building, a huge fire at an ExxonMobil oil storage facility, and a citywide blackout. All of you New Yorkers remember citywide blackouts. All of these critical situations were handled skillfully by our members with the minimum loss of life. In a city this size, of course, anything can happen. So, how to manage the monumental task of protecting it? It seems to me that 2 elements are absolutely vital in this equation: capability and flexibility. Capability, having the tools at our disposal, having the most reliable and up-to-date equipment, placing our resources in locations where they will be easily accessible and effective. It means having plans at the ready to deal with the events that are likely to occur. And most importantly, it means having well-trained first responders. The importance of planning and preparedness, then, cannot be overstated. But of course, plans and preparations alone won't come to the rescue in a difficult moment. We must have people who are capable of implementing those plans. I like how Columbia professor Sidney Morgenbasser put it, describing the dangers of pragmatism. It sounds good in theory, but it'll never work in practice. Well, we simply don't know what the next major incident is going to be, and so we have to be flexible. We have to be ready for whatever happens. It could be a chemical attack, it could be a Category 5 hurricane, another blackout or brownout. To put it another way, we plan for an event. We don't plan for the event. Does that sound familiar to you, Chief McNally? That's a quote from one of our recent meetings. Of course, the biggest event in the FDNY's history came on September 11th, 2001. And that was an event that truly changed everything for the fire department. And it brought the concept of disaster preparedness to the fore in state and local governments across America as it never was before. Before 9/11, our firefighters were trained to respond, to the most part, for unintentional acts. While loss of life and unknown dangers were always part of the job, it wasn't until the World Trade Center attack in 2001 that the department was faced with the reality of responding to a deliberate attack designed to kill thousands upon thousands of people. That realization, of course, was compounded by the terrible losses this department suffered on 9/11. The numbers are well known, but no less astounding for their familiarity. 343 members were killed. They had a combined total of 4,400 years of experience, and all this in the space of just about 102 minutes. We lost people of every rank, from firefighters straight out of our training academy to our highest ranking officers, including the chief of the department and the first deputy commissioner. Then, following 9/11, came the retirements. In 2002, almost 1,300 uniformed members retired from the department. In 2003, 700 members left. Pre-9/11, we would average about 500 retirees a year. In the last 6 years, 50% of the department turned over. 50% of the department has less than 6 years on the job. That's not a lot of experience for a firefighter. I became commissioner on January 1st, 2002, 3 months after the terrorist attacks. And of course, the first task was to turn our attention, really a monumental task, of rebuilding this great institution. I found it a department in mourning and a department that needed a lot of work. The first step was to get some help in figuring out what went right and what went wrong with our response on 9/11. We enlisted the renowned consulting firm, McKinsey & Company, to come in and analyze our response to the attacks. They reviewed our operations, our procedures, and they made recommendations and a wonderful comprehensive report as to how we could increase our preparedness. We followed that report, a very detailed report, and in response to their findings, we set about implementing the recommendations, and we managed to put together the first ever FDNY strategic plan. Their report and our strategic plan laid out a roadmap for strengthening the department. It set a clear set of priorities because 9/11 showed us that the rules of the game had changed and our priorities had to change as well. We greatly enhanced training that helps in part to make up for the lack of experience, but not entirely. We enhanced training giving to our members of all ranks, both fire and emergency medical services. For example, when I came to the department, our firefighters spent 13 weeks at our training academy before coming on the job. Now they study and train for 23 weeks. We stepped up our more specialized training. We trained more than 3,600 fire and EMS members in advanced hazardous materials response, something we fear we may have to deal with. That is nearly 5 times the number we had before 9/11. In addition, we devised 2 advanced level courses for our offices, one in conjunction with Columbia University's graduate school that focuses on management, and another with West Point that focuses on combating terrorism. These 2 programs give our senior members a level of training and education unprecedented in the department's history. One of the key recommendations made in the McKinsey report was the department's need for a technologically sophisticated operations command center. And last year, we opened such a center. It's a $17 million state-of-the-art facility located at headquarters. The FDOC gives us unprecedented situational awareness and the ability to direct operations remotely from headquarters, from an operations center, instead of everybody having to be at the site of an emergency. Generals don't walk up to the front lines to direct their troops. They're back at operations centers. We took a page from their book. At the operations center, we have access to maps, building records, information on local infrastructure, and that helps our commanders make tactical decisions. It provides us with live helicopter feeds of any situation as it progresses, and it's a critical point of contact with city, state, and federal agencies. For example, last May, some of you may remember the high-rise that houses the coach company's offices had what appeared at first to be a terrible fire. From the street, as you approach, you would think that the entire top floor and the roof was ablaze. Well, from our operations center, we could pull up a picture of the building. We could rotate it and see exactly what it looked like on our video screens. And we saw that the fire was really just a fire of wooden sheds that had been built for storage on the roof of the building. It changed everything for the field commanders because they could proceed straight to the roof, and quickly they put out the fire. They knew they didn't have to walk through an entire top floor of fire. We've made other crucial improvements in technology. Most importantly, we deployed new handy-talkie radios, the radios that the firefighters carry in the field. These radios provide significant advantages over the models that were in use on 9/11. Our current radios also support a large number of channels. They use the UHF, ultra-high frequency band, which allows for greater penetration in buildings and in the New York environment. And most importantly, perhaps, it allows for interoperability with other agencies, including the police department, who all use UHF frequencies. In addition, we developed a system for mobile communication in high-rise buildings. It consists of the handy-talkies, high-powered post radios that go up into the building with the incident commander, and battalion car repeaters. They pick up the weak signal from the handy-talkies, enhance it, and send it up into the building, and it works very well. In effect, there we've devised a mobile communication system, which again is similar to the military. We move our communication system with us as we need it. We've made improvements to the equipment that we give our members to improve their safety. Last year, we deployed radiation detectors, new masks that protect from chemical and biological agents, and we began using new and improved personal safety ropes, allowing our firefighters a secure way to escape the upper floors of a building should they become trapped in the building. One of the things that became glaringly clear after 9/11 was that better coordination, information sharing was needed between first responder agencies. Up until then, the fire department, like a lot of emergency response agencies, functioned on its own. We are the biggest fire department in the country. I think it's the best fire department in the country, the best trained fire department in the country, and so we did things on our own. But after the devastating attacks, however, we realized, along with most other agencies, that cooperation, coordination is absolutely vital. In 2005, Mayor Bloomberg and the city's Office of Emergency Management developed something called the Citywide Incident Management System, known as SIMS for short. That's a protocol for managing emergencies, any emergency that involves multiple agencies. SIMS defines how citywide emergencies or for large-scale multiple incidents will be managed. It uses as a template the National Incident Management System that we hope will be employed throughout the country. Another major change was our development of something called Incident Management Teams, or IMTs, made up of emergency professionals with specialty disciplines to respond to and provide support at large-scale events that are likely to last more than 24 hours. The kind of event where first responders could become overwhelmed by the event. And the fire department learned how helpful IMTs could be in the aftermath of 9/11, when the massive recovery operation was underway at the World Trade Center. The IMT concept was developed by the U.S. Forestry Service primarily to deal with natural disasters, earthquakes, forest fires. After the attacks, a Forestry Service incident management team came to New York and offered to help us at Ground Zero. It turned out we learned that they were of enormous assistance with logistics and planning, keeping our members fed and supplied with everything they needed, effectively putting a management umbrella over the whole recovery operation. Now, this was a departure, again, from how things were normally done. As one of our chiefs put it at the time, if you had told us 6 weeks ago that our Forestry Service was going to bail it out, we would have had you committed. We began training our members in incident management protocol in 2003, so that in 2005, when disaster struck the Gulf states in the form of Hurricane Katrina, and when the call for help came from Louisiana, we were in a position to respond effectively. Within 24 hours of getting that call, we had 350 firefighters medically evaluated, inoculated, and on their way to New Orleans, including 24 members of an incident management team. They arrived, of course, to find the city in shambles, New Orleans Fire Department exhausted and drained. Our members were able to help not just put out the fires, but also transport supplies, establish a command support structure. In total, 650 members were activated for duty in New Orleans. Give you an idea how helpful that must have been. Just bear in mind that at full strength, the entire New Orleans Fire Department is about 700 members. Just last week, we sent 7 IMT-trained members to California to help the agencies there deal with the fires that were sweeping across the state. Only 7 people, but they were put to work dealing with the enormously important matter of logistics. They made sure that the people fighting the fire had all the water, fuel, food, sanitary supplies that they needed. This is not the first time we've been called upon to do that. Last August, we sent a team to forest fires in Idaho, and we will soon have 150 specially trained members on our IMTs. Here in New York, the department has partnered with multiple agencies, both at drills and table exercises and at real-life events, and it has certainly paid off. All of you from New York will remember that in July we had a 24-inch steam pipe that lay underneath a busy street in Manhattan explode. A geyser of superheated steam and debris burst through the pavement. Our response had to be coordinated with a number of agencies: the police, Con Ed, Department of Health, Department of Environmental Protection, Office of Emergency Management. They successfully set up a unified command under a protocol established by the citywide incident management system. And in what may be the most groundbreaking interagency project in the department's history, this year we partnered with the Department of Homeland Security in an intelligence sharing project that includes fire departments from across the country. As some of you may know, it is highly unusual for the federal government to share their intelligence reports with local governments. There are a couple of common public misperceptions about the FDNY's response on 9/11 that I'd like to spend just a couple of minutes on. The most prevalent is that chaos and confusion reigned at the site before the buildings collapsed. While there certainly were flaws in the responses of all the emergency agencies, including us, video footage and photographs show that firefighters and fire officers acted in a cohesive, disciplined, and professional way in accordance with their training. And they had received training specific to the World Trade Center. Firefighters and fire officers knew the buildings well. They even conducted drills in them and tested the radio repeater system that is built into that, was built into that building. Now, firefighters, it is often said, are a special breed. That's no cliche. They really are. They love to fight fires. They love to respond to the emergencies. They crave the action. They're always the last man out. Firefighters won't leave a building when they know it's still occupied, no matter how bad the conditions may be. And they're always anticipating the big one. But no one in the department could ever imagine that the big one would happen in the way that it did. For the firefighters who responded to the World Trade Center after the planes hit and who faced the job of rescuing trapped civilians, the awesome severity of the situation was immediately and terribly clear. No one had ever seen anything like that before. Not even the most senior men in the department with 30, 40 years on the job. Not even our two highest ranking officers at the time, our Chief of Operations then, Dan Nigro, our Chief of Department, Pete Gansey. As they drove across the Brooklyn Bridge, those two experienced chiefs, as they headed for the burning Trade Center, Chief Dan Nigro said to Chief Gansey, "This is going to be the worst day of our lives." Gansey was killed in the collapse. Despite this grim reality, firefighters and fire officers like Captain Terry Hatton, he was a well-respected officer in command of one of our elite units, Rescue 1, they went ahead and they did their job, though they knew what they were facing. A fellow firefighter and friend recounts that he saw Terry in the command post set up in the North Tower that morning. And Terry said to him, "I love you, brother, but this may be the last time I see you." They hugged, anticipating the worst. Terry went up into the building. He never made it out. Consider for a moment the remarkable story of Battalion Chief Oriel Palmer on that day. Chief Palmer was an accomplished athlete, a marathon runner. He took an elevator to the 40th floor of the South Tower, and from there he proceeded to the upper floors on foot, carrying 75 pounds of equipment. He was looking for trapped survivors. As he makes his way toward the massive fire, he methodically radios crucial information and warnings about breached walls and non-working elevators. He climbed all the way to the 78th floor, the floor just before the impact zone. We have tapes of the transmissions. There he finds numerous dead bodies and fire. On the tape of his radio transmission, you hear him gasp. When I heard the tape, I thought he was just out of breath from the climb. But as he goes on, I see he's not. He's just shocked at what he sees. He calls for 2 hose lines. He realizes the fire is too big to put out, but he hopes to soak down the stairways and get above the firestorm raging 8 floors above him and get the people down who are trapped there. He radios one of his officers, who's a few floors below him, calling for the hose lines. And the response comes back immediately, "We're on our way, Chief." Minutes later, the radio falls silent. There's a deafening roar as 91 floors of steel and concrete collapse, crushing Chief Palmer, his team, and hundreds of others. It was the poet Emerson who said, "There's no history, only biography." And I think in times of life-threatening crisis, that is the theme of this conference, in times of disaster, the most important protagonists are often ordinary men and women who in the course of their everyday tasks perform extraordinary acts. Responding to a disaster requires logistical, tactical planning, scientific calculation. But disaster response, I think, is also a human story, a contest between personal will and adversity and of the human spirit challenging terrible odds. It's a story of people like Chief Gansey, Captain Hatton, Chief Palmer, and the chiefs who are with me tonight. They were there on 9/11, all 3. Chief of Operations, Pat McNally, Chief of Department, Sal Casano, our first Deputy Commissioner, former Chief of Department, Frank Crothers, and the thousands of others who responded to the Trade Center. They overcame staggering losses, went on to build a stronger, even more dedicated, and better prepared department. And I think it's literally true that our safety, our future, perhaps our very existence may well depend on such people. I thank you. We look forward to seeing the results of the deliberations being conducted at this conference. Thank you very much. You want me to stay there while I answer questions, or I can sit there?
Yeah. First, if you'll call me Bob, I'll call you Nick. How does that work?
No, I want you to call me Commissioner.
Do you?
No.
Okay.
That we'd be delighted to call you Bob.
Let me.
You call me Nick.
Let me. I very much would like to have you expand on the communications improvements that have been made since 9/11. The Ops Center, the Citywide Information Management System, the incident management teams itself, it seems to me, are part of that communication system, the handy-talkie system. I'd like to expand that a bit, but one of the things that I'd like to ask you immediately is the statement that you made about the collaboration between DHS, the Federal Department of Homeland Security, and the Fire Department of New York, that it's rare for the feds, you said, something effective to share intelligence. And it caused a great deal of concern when I heard you say that, because among the things that we saw on the 9/11 Commission. I was
going to say, I forgot that you were on the 9/11 Commission.
Yeah.
How could I forget that after being questioned?
But I apologize for John Lehman for that. You said that no one could imagine the big one would happen the way it did. And I think it's absolutely true inside of FDNY that imagining it happening the way it did would have been nearly impossible. But I don't think the same is true with the feds. I don't think it's true that is the case at the federal government. I do think that had scenario analysis been done differently, had warnings gone out, as they did in the run-up to the millennium in 1999, to put people at a higher state of alert. I mean, the trial of the East African Embassy bombers was going on in the Southern District of New York in the summer of 2001. So how much intelligence sharing is going on? I mean, do you feel like there needs to be a lot more, or do you think it's adequate, or where would you advise us to come down on that issue?
Well, I think when you're dealing with first responder agencies, there should be a good deal of intelligence sharing, much more. This is new as a pilot that's just underway. We have a number of our top-level people have top-secret security clearance, and there ought to be intelligence sharing with those people. We have a representative on the intelligence panel, on the counterterrorism intelligence panel, the group, and that gets us some, but we're talking about intelligence that's fast-moving, new events occurring, and it typically goes through the police department, and then there's a screening and a decision made as to how much they're going to share, how much they must share in order to be prepared. And this, the novelty, the uniqueness of what is going on now with Homeland Security, and the head of their intelligence unit is the one who has been in New York talking with us and worked at the conference, is that the information will come directly to the fire department, obviously going to those people with top secret clearance to protect the intelligence. There's always a great concern that if you share intelligence, as you know, you share intelligence with too many people, you lose it. It's no longer intelligence. Yeah. But I know what you're referring to, because I watched a good deal of the hearings, and you know, the memos, the warnings that were there, and the explanations for why they weren't taken seriously. I think were troubling to everybody in the business.
Well, I can just express an opinion independent of the 9/11 Commission. I was on the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, was vice chairman for 6 years. And this idea that you have to protect the intelligence gets us in trouble because oftentimes, number one, it's useful to have somebody there just to check your work. Maybe your conclusion is wrong, and if it's classified top secret, there's nobody there to say, hey, your decimal point's off 2 points.
Sure.
Or something like that. And secondly, it does compartmentalize. It means that the person that needs to get the information oftentimes doesn't get the information. And so the big picture isn't seen. And I would say thirdly, the public isn't informed. And oftentimes, as a consequence, is not able to provide the public support necessary to do something. And that's clearly what happened to Osama bin Laden. I mean, we didn't know who he was until after 9/11.
Right.
And he'd been determined to attack since 1991. And we knew who he was in 96, but we kept it all classified. So you said that there's a citywide information management system, which sounds really important. But did I hear you say that you hope that the National Information Management System gets developed? Is that?
Oh, no, we're modeled on it, and it just should be adopted and implemented in every jurisdiction. It was not easy to develop a citywide incident management system in New York, and took a good deal of discussion with OEM and the various agencies because traditionally there's some competition in certain areas of response. And agencies were anxious to, whether it made sense or not, were anxious to take over certain activities that traditionally had been with other departments and so forth. It is the difficulty of coordinating agencies in a large city like New York. And that's just New York, where you have a mayor who can direct agency heads to do what his plan mandates. Then coordinating with the state and then coordinating with the federal government is, of course, much more complex. No, I think the national system exists. We used it as a model. The issue is how well implemented is it in large cities around the country. And I don't know the answer to that precisely. I know that it works very well in New York.
So, but if there's intelligence indicating that there's a particular risk to the city of New York, does it come down then through the police department? Does Dave Cohen get the call?
It comes down primarily through the police department, and now we have this new, we'll see how well it works, conduit access through Homeland Security, yes.
Do you stress test the system to see how it would work?
We haven't as yet, but we have received intelligence on matters that happily did not turn into a need for an operational response.
Now, one of the things that you said that I think was quite important because it suggests many of the things that it seemed, at least as I read the stories of the California fires, seem to be, at least people are looking at it more closely, is that an awful lot of the work to reduce the threat needs to be done by the private sector, by individuals as well as people in the private sector. Specifically, you said that the World Trade Center had a repeater system in it, and those are private buildings. I know that there's been some effort to get people in the private sector that own large buildings in the city of New York. By the way, California was, if you want to reduce the destruction of the fires, quit building so damn many homes in areas that are going to burn every year. So are there things beyond what has been done today that you'd like to see done to make it easier to
Well, you know, our original plan, if we just stay with communications for a minute, was to have piggyback on what the police department does. You know, when a police officer is talking to another police officer, he may see him 2 blocks away and he's talking on a radio, a handy-talkie. He's not really talking directly, or usually, to that police officer. It's going to a receiver that gets there are hundreds of them all over the city, more than hundreds. And it will amplify the signal and then send it on. That's the repeater. Receiving, amplifying it, and sending it on. And we initially thought that might be useful for us if we piggyback on their system, except that we're moving from emergency to emergency, and we could do something, we think, we have done something even more suitable for our purposes and adaptable and very reliable. When a firefighter is in, say, the lobby of a high-rise building, it will be virtually impossible with that little handy-talkie to broadcast up into the building without some assistance. So what he does is radio out to a battalion chief's car, and every one of them have this system built into it. It receives that weak, comparatively weak signal, enhances it, strengthens it, and then sends it up into the building. There will be a chief officer, usually on the floor below the fire, we'll say, if that's the emergency. He has what we're calling a post radio. It's a radio at that post. That's a very powerful radio with it's a little suitcase arrangement. And they will get the signal from the repeater. So handy-talkie to the repeater system, battalion chief car, up into the building where there's a powerful post radio, and of course the signal will be received by all the firefighters on that floor with their handy-talkies. But the chief up there can broadcast through that powerful post radio. It's 40 watts. And it will reach people at the fire scene. It will go down to the repeater system in the battalion chief's car. We'll go back to firefighters in the lobby, in the street, who are staging to come up. The system works really quite well. And what's really enormously useful for us, it's a portable communication system. We move it to wherever we need it. Every battalion chief has the repeaters. Every firefighter has the walkie-talkies. Every commander will have a post radio available. And that's worked very well. Instead of the long-term, enormously expensive task, the estimate is over $200 million, and that's a low estimate because that was given 6 years ago, to piggyback onto the police department's repeaters that are in buildings all over the city. It works for them to have that kind of communication. Our system works for us to have our kind of system. And it's been very effective.
Did you ever think 6 years ago that you'd know all this kind of thing?
No. I was busy worrying about what was happening to kids in New York City in foster care and in prevention programs.
Well, let me sort of stick with
now I worry about other kids in the fire department.
Stick with this communication system, because are there technologies out there that either by having active R&D or just sort of you'd like to try out that it's difficult to try out as a consequence of almost any barrier that might be there? I'm thinking of UAVs, the distributed handheld systems that you see particularly being used in the military. Are there things on your wish list that either because of dollars or because of other issues you're not able to do?
We're working on something now that would be enormously helpful. I don't know how many of you have gotten close enough to a command post at a fire that's going on for a while. If you do get close, you'll see there's a large board, and there are really magnets with labels on them being moved around on the board and written onto the board. Those magnets are telling the commander what units are there, and those that have arrived, those that need to be relieved, and things of that sort. That's the command board. At the World Trade Center, when those buildings came down, all those boards, of course, were destroyed. Everything around the two buildings was destroyed. What we're working on is a sophisticated piece of technology, a wireless command board that will do many things. Just by putting in the names of the units and so forth, they will all appear on the screen. It will also be a permanent record of those who have arrived, where they're deployed, everything about the tactics of fighting that fire. It will be connected wirelessly, of course, to our fire department operations center. So all the information, if it's a large event, will be coming to the FDOC, our operations center, and a senior chief there who can be commanding, helping command the event out there in the street because all the information is coming to him. That wireless command board is in development. We did a pilot, found it operated too slowly, and New York City being what it is, wireless communications can be very difficult in the city with high-rise buildings, metal buildings, frames, concrete buildings, many ways that a signal can get diluted or blocked. So that is an important development that we have now. We can call it in R&D. We have a major corporation doing the technology for us.
But you just actually touched on one that would seem to me be maybe it's too expensive or too difficult for political reasons. I really have no idea. But shouldn't we be trying to solve this wireless issue?
Oh, absolutely. No question.
Is that a cost, or is that a regulatory? Is that a?
Well, I think it's a cost. I think it's technology as well. It's any experienced first responder who relies on radio communications will tell you that there's no foolproof 100% operable radio system operating in the city, and you're going to have to improvise. The subway is another problem. What we do now, they're building in a system in the subway system, and it'll have what amounts to repeaters throughout the stations and tunnels, and we hope one day we'll be able to use that. We've tried it. It shows great promise. It's not ready yet, we don't think. We operate in relays in the subways. You'll have a series of firefighters talking to each other and relaying the signal down, because you won't get from a handheld radio, you won't get a signal from the street down into a subway tube or anybody trying to receive it where you are more than a matter of yards away from the entrance of the subway. You just can't penetrate that. So we use relays, and that works reasonably well. But the MTA is building in a system, a communication system that we'll be able to rely on, I think, fairly soon.
So what, at the Op Center, at the FDOC, what produces the image? You said you can see what's going on in a building. Where do you get those images?
Well, we get video feeds. We can set up cameras, too, and we've tested that. It's worked very well. That will send back video to our operations center. We get video feeds from police helicopters. We have a very cooperative arrangement with the police department with helicopters.
Is that new? That's post 9/11?
Yes, post 9/11. Any major event, any two-alarm or more, we will have the option of sending a battalion chief up in a police helicopter. And that's what we use helicopters for, not fighting fires. You can't do that in an urban setting. But for reconnaissance, you can do it for brush fires. It would help somewhat, but we mostly do it for reconnaissance. And that's enormously helpful, as that example of the fire on top of the coach building demonstrated to us. So that, where did we start with this?
Well, the images.
About the FDOC. Well, we get them from video cameras in helicopters. We get them from video cameras that we can set up in the street on tripods if we had to have that kind of event. The helicopters are especially useful. And we have protocols with some of the TV stations to use a feed from their TV news the helicopters that go up when they're broadcasting an event that they want to see from above. And that's been helpful as well. So the police feeds, helicopters, the commercial TV stations, helicopters as well. And that becomes enormously important, very useful. One of the remarkable things, I would never be able to begin to tell you what the technology is that makes it work, but the city has photographed virtually every building in the city, has done that for decades, and keeps updating as new buildings are built or buildings come down. And so that it would be unusual that we could not call up on a screen a building when there's an emergency there. Some of you will remember there was a townhouse explosion in Midtown. And we had up on the screen that building. We can rotate it. The computer will rotate the building and give you all sides. So we were able to tell from our operations center at headquarters, tell the commander in the field exactly where the explosion had blown out part of the building, exactly what had collapsed. And we were able to rescue someone who was in the building because we knew so much about it and where the explosion had happened and what the collapse, what exactly had happened at the collapse. And we found him in the rubble and got him out. So that is just remarkable to be able to see all 4 exposures of a building from headquarters and relay that information to the firefighters, especially in the Manhattan environment.
Well, it seems to me, and I'm going to invite the audience. I'm going to ask one more question and then let the audience ask questions if you want to. And if there's no questions, I'll keep asking questions until the time runs out. It seemed, just as a resident of the city, watching signals that perhaps the economy is slowing and that tax revenue could be in decline. And knowing, parallel with that beyond the motivation of the firemen, that both training and technology get out of date in a hurry.
Yeah.
And that, in my experience, mostly at the local level, training technology budgets are oftentimes the most vulnerable. Because so much of your budget is personnel. It's hard to get at personnel. You're likely, as a consequence, to go to either short technology, or not you, but we as a public, technology and training. And I'm curious if you share that concern. And secondly, and very much connected that, if you would agree with the conclusion that I've reached, which is that New York is a special case in the nation, and that since we've been attacked twice and at least 4 additional attempts that were unsuccessful, it's the only city in the nation that has that kind of a record. That seems to me an obligation I would say on a continuing basis for the Congress and the President to recognize this as a part of a national security problem that's more than just the municipality trying to make certain that we can put out fires and handle emergencies.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And we have argued and been to Washington and lobbied for a formula that is risk-based in distributing Homeland Security funding. There are many, you will get many explanations for why this happens. I think it is entirely political, that you will have jurisdictions in Utah and Idaho and Omaha getting Homeland Security money and their fire departments buying these, or their first responders buying sophisticated equipment with that money that they probably are never going to use. But it's available and they want it and they want the latest and so forth. It may be just something you know a lot more about than I do, having spent those years in the Senate and being governor of a state. The political reality that there has to be, it is felt, I suppose, that there has to be a certain distribution in states that may not need the money all that much in order to get the legislation through or get the appropriation through. That's what seems to me, but that's what's happening. But you could make the case that New York, Washington, Chicago, Los Angeles, the target cities, really should be getting the lion's share of Homeland Security funding. We just found out our appropriation, I think, maybe you know this and maybe you don't, Sal. That is a little over $30 million, is it? 34.2. That we, just yesterday, I think it was, that the decision was made that of the money that's come to New York State, $34 million will come to the fire department. Our budget is $1.1 billion. $34 million is an awful lot of money, but it gets absorbed very quickly when you have major training initiatives to put in place. And in the fire department, because of the nature, we're a 24-hour service, so we have to have firefighters on duty 24 hours a day. That means that, and then they get their time off that you must, of course, allow for. And so training for us is almost always a very expensive proposition because it's done on overtime. We have to bring them in on days when they would normally not be working in order to do training. So the whole subject of financing first responders and preparedness and response capability, you just have to think about how much money we're spending in Iraq. Agree with the war or not, those resources could do an enormous amount of good in all these areas, and including the areas that have nothing to do with disaster preparedness, such as education and the social services that go by the boards and all those things. It's astonishing that we have found that kind of money to fight that war.
Well, I would just as a suggestion, also based on my experience for whatever the suggestion is worth, is that I think unless and until, I would say, I would put New York and Los Angeles in the category. Those two cities, Homeland Security budget should be in the defense budget, not in Department of Homeland Security. Because if you think of it in defense appropriations, you've got it oriented correctly, in my view. And then you can fight for whatever you want to from DHS as well. But until it's seen as a national security problem, you're going to be fighting for crumbs. And because you're absolutely right. I mean, as you know, we tend to spend the most amount of money on the least likely thing that's going to happen. And so you're sitting out in East Pucker Brush, Indiana. You can create a scenario in which Al Qaeda is going to attack the site of the world's largest ball of string or something. In fact, I think we did send some out to East Pucker Brush to take care of the world's largest ball of string. So I think as long as you're fighting for money inside of the DHS appropriations, you're going to come up short. You've got to get. I think at least New York, and I'm willing to say New York and L.A., but at least New York's got to be in the defense budget.
So we've made friends with Michael Chernoff. We should have made friends with the Secretary of Defense.
Not easy to do, but we should make friends with the Secretary of Defense.
I suspect
that
would be much. Michael is easier to get along with.
But it's actually it's a congressional action. It will take Congress to do it. It's a law that allocates it at DHS as opposed to Defense. Are there questions? Yes.
Yes, I have a specific question about a specific future disaster that might happen. That is actually quite realistic, and most New Yorkers aren't really aware of it. As global warming changes the way the oceans behave or the air current change, it's very likely we get a rather strong tropical weather system to come through and influence the city. I was reflecting on the fact that we had that squall that came in I think, August and dropped a tornado in Bayside, or Bay Ridge, and flooded large parts of
Your microphone's coming your way.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. I'm asking a specific question about a disaster most New Yorkers probably haven't thought about a whole lot because we're so far north and we aren't aware of it. But with global warming changing weather patterns, and with that severe supercell thunderstorm that dropped a tornado in Brooklyn and flooded parts of Brooklyn and Queens that are very low lying, in what ways are the fire department and other emergency officials in the city and maybe other levels of government preparing for a major hurricane event here in the city, which would make the problems of a tornado and flooding in Brooklyn and Queens, that much worse?
There's a hurricane evacuation plan that would be coordinated by the Office of Emergency Management. Maps have been created that predict what parts of the city might suffer flooding, for example, if you had a Category 5 storm. And there are, we have assigned fire companies that would be dispatched depending on the location and that they had to get to, and transport teams go out there and get people out of flooded areas. People who live in threatened areas would be informed. The communications would be enormously important, advance notice. informed about the conditions that were coming so they could move where they can and get out of it. People live in threatened areas where the nearest bus shelters, bus locations will be, to move them to shelters. It's a fairly sophisticated plan. Happily, we've had no experience with it. You don't really know if all those plans are effective until you've had to implement them and use them. Let's hope we never have a Katrina kind of disaster here. But there are areas of the city, of course, that would be flooded if you had a storm of that magnitude. But there is a plan.
Yes.
Just a follow-up on your operations center visualization capabilities, they sound quite remarkable. I'm curious if there's been work, since almost all new buildings and actually renovations of existing buildings at this point in time are designed in 3 dimensions through digital software. I'm wondering if there's been coordination through Department of Buildings or through the design communities in the city to provide internal modeling of buildings to the fire department in order that not just the exterior of the structure is visible, at least in large buildings, but the interior 3-dimensional space is also something that you can model in your in your operations center.
Yeah, we have much better coordination with the city agencies. Department of Buildings is one, because it's so vital to us with respect to making sure inspections are done of the buildings that should be inspected. We need to know when there's construction, when there's demolition, when there's some sort of abatement going on, asbestos abatement. We had that terrible event at the Deutsche Bank building, and so we know how important that is. I mentioned the wireless command boards. Part of the information that would be able to go into those boards would be a layout of a building that we're responding to. And so that's available to us in a manual way. And there's information that goes to a computer in every fire engine, fire truck, that would give a little information. It's called critical information dispatch system, SIDS, and it's limited number of lines that can appear on that computer. So that's not the whole story about a building, but it will tell you some critical things to know about a building, and there are about 80,000 buildings that we have that kind of information about. But how much better it would be if in the wireless command board you could pull up on the screen a layout of the building and whatever floor you happen to be going to and other information in the building. So we are working on that.
Over here.
Commissioner Scoppetta, on September 11th, 2001, I was with my New York Army National Guard unit, 69th Infantry, down on the pile. We stayed there for the next 10 days and beyond. And it's obvious from all the research that's been done at Mount Sinai and at St. Barnabas that around 70% of first responders are ill as a result of 9/11 contamination. And there's been a ton of research on this. Just from your own perspective, do you think that the EPA has been completely forthright with all the data, and has Christy Todd Whitman done justice in her testimony before Congress on what first responders and the rest of the New York community around that area were exposed to on that day? And if not so, what else do you think that we should be knowing?
Well, we're in a unique position with respect to the health of our members. Every member of the fire department had to take a medical exam when he or she came in, takes a medical exam on an annual basis or close to it, every 13, 14 months. So we have a lot of medical data on all our firefighters. And within days of 9/11, our Bureau of Health Services, the doctors there, fire department employees, began tracking the medical condition of firefighters coming in for treatment. And they do come to our doctors first before they go out to other doctors. So we started compiling information about the health of our firefighters. We have a very detailed database. And the city has spent a lot of time now looking at this and holds up the fire department's medical program and medical tracking as a model for what should happen everywhere. So that leads us to certain conclusions. One, those who arrive first at the pile have the highest incidence of illness. Those who stayed longest at the pile have the second highest. But those who were there in the first 24, 48, and the 72 hours have the highest incidence. Most of what we've seen are respiratory disorders, overwhelmingly so. There is a lot of discussion about what else. We have a report that we put out to the field recently that has all of this detail in it. We could be, probably if you write to fire department headquarters, we could just give you a copy. There's also a lot of concern about certain other illnesses, cancer, for example. Now, cancer takes a long time to develop, is what our doctors are telling us. It's hard to verify whether someone who has cancer today or in the last couple of years contracted it because of 9/11. But there's reason to believe that that might be the case. Most of what we've seen are respiratory. Most of the retirements that have been medical and related to 9/11 have been due to lung conditions. There is the retirement, the pension laws have certain presumptive bills in them. If you develop a heart condition after 20 years or 30 years of being in the fire department, it's presumed you got that heart condition as a result of being, certain heart conditions, of being in the fire department, and that gives you certain benefits in the pension. We have seen, and so we know a lot about why people retire and whether they have disabilities when they retire. It affects the pension if there are certain kinds of disabilities. And we've seen a lot of retirements due to lung conditions. That's the single greatest medical condition that exists. That's not to rule out all the rest. And so we're doing a lot. We've gotten a lot of funding to track and treat our people as well. But the medical monitoring program that we have in place and was put in place, was begun right after 9/11, is the first of its kind, enormously important, because we're going to track our members after they retire, and we will find out what happens to people like our firefighters who are exposed to the conditions that they are for their entire professional life. What happens to them medically, and we hope that will help us either design equipment or have treatments or other things that will either prevent or be able to more readily treat them.
The second part was, I do remember myself hearing EPA say that the air at the site was safe. I'm thinking to myself, how could that possibly be?
Well, it wasn't at the site, right at the site. It certainly wasn't. If somebody tried to generalize about the condition of the air, of the environment, 20 blocks away or so, I couldn't speak for it. But our people were going on that pile just as you did every day, and some did it for 12 months, 9 months, 10 months.
We can take one more question?
There's
Yes, sir.
a lady out there.
Oh, I'm sorry. Over here. Oh, two more questions. I respond to whiners. You know? Yes, please.
Commissioner?
Yes.
I've heard that over 70% of first responders did not wear protective masks at the site because of these EPA statements that the air was safe, and also from statements from the city of New York that the air was safe. Were your firefighters wearing protective masks that were adequately protective given the extremely toxic circumstances?
Some were and some weren't. They were available to them. They wore a mask. Many wore masks. I was down at the site many, many times, and most people were wearing something not the kind of protective gear they wear where they go into a fire and dense smoke conditions, but they're wearing masks that filtered something of from their front, the front of their. I think I didn't get there till January, and I think it was quite a different circumstance. The smoke and the fires had been by then brought under control. But I think it's a mix. Some did, some didn't.
But Commissioner, 250 stories of office tower were pulverized into dust when the towers fell. Over 100 stories on Tower 1, 100 in Tower 2, and then, of course, Building 7, which some Americans still do not know about. The buildings were brought down in under 10 seconds apiece, pulverized to dust, and there's an incredible amount of contaminants in that dust. And for people to have, for the majority, the overwhelming majority of people to not have protective masks is sheer folly. And now we have tens of thousands of people who are currently sick. You know how cancers have latency periods. You spoke of that yourself right now, but we do have an emergency. I want to tell everybody in this room we have an emergency right now of very sick first responders. And this is not just a little asthma. These are families decimated. These are people who are homeless, jobless, penniless, on food stamps or worse, without food stamps. And the care has not come because the recognition has not come because of falsified statements and fear of repercussions and fear of lawsuits and so on. But I'm telling you that there is a huge 9/11 community out there now, and many more coming down the pike because of this contamination. And
well, we have testified in Washington, testified in New York. The mayor has spoken up about this, that the federal government should be giving us a great deal of assistance on this issue.
It's
and
urgent.
We're really projecting out just at the fire department.
This is a humanitarian cause, Commissioner.
A couple $100 million.
This is just a human thing.
Yes.
And if you had family suffering the way I know people who are suffering, all of the people at this disaster conference would be speaking about it, and they wouldn't be complacent. It's very serious. It's truly horrible. And everyone said America's heroes. It's time to give back to them. They gave in America's time of need, and it's time to give back to them in their time of need, and their time of need is now. It is now.
I agree with you.
I heard from a first responder who had surgery for his larynx because he has so much scar tissue from coughing, and I couldn't meet with him this week because he was having surgery to God only knows what for his larynx. He told me he's been in contact with the CDC and that over 1,800 have already died. That's a lot of suffering. That's a lot of families. That's a lot of lives and many more to follow. What about the cleanup? New York, has your city been cleaned up? Has anyone heard about the cleanup? It's time to start talking and giving back to America's heroes who gave to you. And walk out of here and think about it and go home to your comfortable lives. But maybe tomorrow you might wake up and think about it. And maybe we should start talking to the politicians. And I don't live in New York. And I've been talking to people for a week. And people have been telling me things about New York and about that whole Joe Zadrogas scandal about Mayor Bloomberg spitting on the grave of that poor man, 450 hours at the pile, this detective, and Bloomberg is just treating him like scum as a pretext to just yank more care and turn his back. And I said, is New York always so corrupt? And they said, yeah, it's always so corrupt. Everybody's corrupt. Everybody's corrupt. But you know what? This is a humanitarian issue. It's not like some political thing.
I think the mayor just met with that family. Or if he hadn't met today,
What,
Monday he's meeting with the family. I think he apologized for what he said
He
in
said
Boston.
he wasn't a hero. They're trying to yank the pension. He died in front of his child of a horrible death.
I don't think we're going to be able to litigate that police officer's case here tonight. We agree with you, certainly at the fire department, that we need a lot of help to monitor and treat people who responded.
Help the first responders of 9/11. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you very much.
Last question.
Well, what I have to ask will be mild by comparison. I'm all for big budgets and big gadgets, and I hope you get more of them. But you had the
Sounds like you're not going to end up there.
But I'm not going to end there, because you had the same capabilities in your Office of Emergency Management, or at least New York did, on that fateful Tuesday, and it did nobody any good. Which doesn't mean it won't be good in fires or some future disaster. But here's the thing. We know from lots of years of disaster research that regular people often respond quite well. They self-organize. In New Orleans, one of the examples was called the Cajun Flotilla. Regular guys got their boats and went into what could have been, was certain danger, and it was completely unorganized by officials. They left 2 lanes of I-10 open for the officials who never came, but they left them open. They were very well organized. There were similar cases, the waterborne evacuation of Lower Manhattan on 9/11 was completely unorganized. The Coast Guard was involved in the following way. They said, screw the rules. There are no rules today. Just everybody go. And regular people helped to effect the greatest waterborne evacuation in history. This suggests that there's enormous value in the local knowledge and talent of regular people and the social networks in which their lives are embedded. What are you doing to leverage that value? I see nothing about that in the incident command system at the federal level, for example. Not even a mention. It's as if people are just something to be managed rather than something that can be leveraged.
Well, the incident command system is talking about government agencies and their coordination and of their response and support from within their disciplines. But there are community groups that give me the name of the CERT groups, Community Assistance Response Team. And we have tried to organize community groups for just the reason that you give. And of course, you would need all the help you could get in a certain kind of disaster, and New Orleans certainly lived through that. And community groups and ordinary citizens can be of enormous assistance. I've tried to focus on the thing I know most about, the trained first responders and firefighters, and it's not so that we had the same capabilities on 9/11 that we have now. It is very, very different now. Just that fire department operations center that I described to you, that is so sophisticated that we could coordinate a response to the World Trade Center, if that happened now, from headquarters without committing so many officers and firefighters to the event. It would just be much more control. And done from a command center quite removed from the place where the buildings collapsed. But let me just say, there's a lot of talk about what went wrong, what went right. Let's just keep in mind, 21 terrorists attacked the World Trade Center, an unprecedented event. Not even the planner of the attack, bin Laden, believed that those buildings would come down. The most he hoped for is that some of the upper floors might collapse. No one believed that those buildings would come down. So an unprecedented attack of that nature, we've tried to learn from it, but I don't fault any of the responders for what happened that day. It was an extraordinary response. You have to know some of the details of the response that day to appreciate it. I gave you a couple of examples. They're moving, it's what we know, it's on the tapes, whatever tapes survived. But there's not a firefighter who could move, who become mobile, who didn't come in that day. People came in off of medical leave. Police did the same thing. We had thousands of firefighters, and nobody self-dispatched. You know, firefighters want to get to the big firefight, the big fire. They didn't just leave they waited for the dispatcher to say whether they should go or not. Many of them champing at the bit to get down there and do what they could. And some of the units that were far removed in the Bronx and so forth, were told to stay where they were, and they did, because response times to fires throughout the city, emergencies throughout the city, went up very, very little. We're talking about a minute or so. That is extraordinary. With thousands of firefighters committed to responding to the World Trade Center, the rest of the city was kept safe. That's just a remarkable performance. We try to make use of citizens. We have the CERT units that I've just described to you. I'm not sure what citizens would have done in the first 24, 48 hours, but we got an awful lot of help from people from across the country and from organizations as well in the recovery effort that went on for 9 to 10 months. So I'm not disagreeing with the point you're making. I'm agreeing with the point you're making. But at a certain point in some disaster, it's going to be the professionals who are going to have to deal with it because they're trained to do it. And a lot of training goes into it, and a lot of special equipment goes into it.
I want to thank Commissioner, you for being with us today. I want to thank you for your years of public service, your compassion, your heart, your intellect, and your patience. Arian, thank you one more time for this 17th annual conference, and I want to thank everybody in the audience for your participation and your excellent questions. Thank you. Thank you.